What happens when the ruthless CEO of the world's most secretive hedge fund, who also happens to be a centuries-old vampire, faces a billion-dollar boardroom catastrophe because his translator vanished? He gets saved by a broke waitress, pulling a double shift. Buckle up, because this boardroom bloodbath gets wild. Nathaniel Croft did not sweat. It was a biological impossibility for a man whose heart had stopped beating somewhere in the winter of 1812. But as he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the private dining suite at the Waldorf Astoria, staring out at the glittering expanse of Manhattan, he experienced a phantom sensation of sheer, unadulterated panic. Nathaniel was the founder and CEO of Croft Capital, a shadow conglomerate that owned everything from major shipping lines in Rotterdam to discreet pharmaceutical labs in Zurich. To the pages of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, he was a reclusive billionaire prodigy. To the hidden underground society of immortals, he was the vampire king of the eastern seaboard. Tonight, however, all that power meant absolutely nothing. At exactly 8 p.m., Lord Grigory Dragomir was arriving to sign the Carpathian Initiative, a $4.2 billion land acquisition deal. On paper, it was a purchase of barren, mountainous terrain in Eastern Europe for rare earth mineral mining. In reality, it was the purchase of the last remaining ancestral sanctuary for vampires, a massive territory completely shielded from both sunlight and modern satellite surveillance. There was only one problem. Dragomir was an ancient traditionalist who despised the modern world. He considered English a peasant's compromise, and absolutely refused to negotiate in anything other than ancient Wallachian, a dead, highly complex dialect that hadn't been spoken natively since the 15th century. Nathaniel had spent 6 months tracking down Dominic Harper, an eccentric linguistics professor from Oxford, paying him $3 million in retainer fees just to sit in this room tonight and translate. It was 7:48 p.m. Dominic was nowhere to be found. His phone went straight to voicemail. His GPS tracker, discreetly slipped into his briefcase by Nathaniel's security team, had gone offline somewhere over the Atlantic. Call him again. Nathaniel snapped his voice, a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated the crystal glasses on the mahogany table. His chief of staff, a lethal, sharply dressed vampire named Arthur, shook his head. Still dead air, sir. We checked his hotel at the St. Regis. He never checked in. I've got operatives combing the city, but Dragomir's motorcade just pulled up to the lobby. Nathaniel closed his eyes, his perfectly tailored Brioni suit feeling suddenly restrictive. If this deal fell through the rival European covens led by the vicious Vivaldi, Cartel would purchase the land, by morning essentially declaring war on Nathaniel's territory. Decades of peace, billions of dollars, and thousands of immortal lives rested on a contract he literally could not read or discuss. In the corner of the room, completely ignored by the brooding billionaires, stood Clara Jenkins. Clara was 24, running on 3 hours of sleep and desperately trying not to drop a tray of beluga caviar. She was an NYU linguistics PhD student, drowning in an ocean of student debt. To make ends meet, she worked for Lumina Catering, an ultra-exclusive agency that serviced the elite of New York. Tonight was supposed to be simple: pour the $10,000 bottles of Chateau Margaux, don't make eye contact, and collect her $500 paycheck to keep her landlord from evicting her. She watched Nathaniel Croft pace the room. She had to admit, the man was aggressively handsome. He had the kind of sharp, aristocratic features that belonged on a marble statue in the Louvre, with dark, stormy eyes, and an intensity that made the air in the room feel heavy. But he also looked like a man about to face a firing squad. "We stall," Nathaniel told Arthur, adjusting his Rolex. "Offer him the vintage blood wine. Smile. Nod. If we can just get him drunk enough, maybe he'll sign the English draft." Dragomir doesn't get drunk, sir, Arthur warned quietly. He gets offended. The heavy oak doors of the dining suite swung open. Lord Grigori Dragomir swept into the room, flanked by 4 massive bodyguards whose tailored suits bulged with hidden weapons. Dragomir was an imposing figure, his face scarred his eyes, a pale, terrifying silver. He didn't offer a hand to shake. He didn't even look at Nathaniel. Instead, Dragomir stepped up to the table, slammed his silver-tipped cane onto the floor, and began speaking in a harsh, guttural language that sounded like cracking stones and tearing silk. It was aggressive, rhythmic, and incredibly fast. Nathaniel forced a tight diplomatic smile. Lord Dragomir, welcome to New York. Unfortunately, my translator has encountered a delay. He gestured politely toward the chairs. Please sit. Let us offer you some refreshments. Dragomir's eyes narrowed. He spat another rapid-fire sentence, this one louder, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. He pointed a long, ring-adorned finger at the contract on the table, then scoffed, turning on his heel to leave. He was walking away. The $4.2 billion deal was dying right there on the Persian rug. Nathaniel's fangs instantly elongated against his bottom lip, an involuntary stress response. He took a step forward, ready to do something incredibly violent and stupid to keep the old vampire in the room. But before Nathaniel could move, a soft, clear voice broke the tension. Domnule Dragomir, vă rog să iertați lipsa de pregătire. Onoarea casei sale este a dumneavoastră. Lord Dragomir, please forgive the lack of preparation. The honor of his house is yours. The entire room froze. Dragomir stopped dead in his tracks, his silver eyes snapping toward the corner of the room. Nathaniel whipped his head around his predatory gaze, locking onto the source of the voice. It was the waitress. Clara stood there, her hands shaking slightly, as she held a pristine white napkin over her arm. Her cheeks flushed under the heavy, terrifying stares of 6 apex predators. Dragomir took a slow step toward her. He tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle. Vorbești limba sângelui vechi, o simplă servitoare. You speak the language of the old blood, a simple servant. Clara swallowed hard, her mind racing back to the 4 years she spent agonizing over dead Eastern European dialects for her dissertation. Nu sunt o servitoare, domnule. Sunt un savant. Și spun că acest om vă respectă prea mult pentru a vă insulta intenționat. I am not a servant, my lord. I am a scholar, and I say this man respects you too much to insult you intentionally. Dragomir stared at her for a long, agonizing second. Then a booming, echoing laugh erupted from his chest. He turned back to Nathaniel, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He spoke in broken, heavily accented English. Your pet human, Dragomir rasped, pointing at Clara. She speaks the mother tongue better than the scholars in my court. We will stay, but she translates. No one else. Nathaniel stared at Clara, his dark eyes wide, with a mixture of shock, awe, and desperate relief. The vampire king of New York had just been saved by a girl in a polyester catering vest. You, Nathaniel said, his voice dropping an octave as he closed the distance between him and Clara. He moved with a terrifying grace, so fast she barely saw him cross the room. Up close, he smelled like expensive cedar-crisp winter air and something dangerously electric. Clara felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She was suddenly acutely aware of how tall he was, towering over her 5'4" frame. "What is your name?" Nathaniel asked, his eyes locked onto hers. He could hear the frantic, rapid flutter of her human heartbeat. It was intoxicating. Clara Jenkins," she stammered, gripping her serving tray like a shield. Clara. He repeated the name, rolling off his tongue smoothly. "How much is your catering company paying you tonight?" $500, she whispered. I will give you $500,000 right now to sit in that chair, take off that apron, and translate every single word that man says for the next 3 hours. Clara's jaw practically hit the floor. 500,000, $500,000. Cash, check, wire, transfer, whatever you want. I will buy the catering company and make you the CEO if you want. Just sit down and do not let him leave this room. Nathaniel's gaze was intense, pleading but commanding. Clara didn't hesitate. She threw the white napkin onto the serving tray, untied her apron, and walked over to the massive mahogany table. She pulled out the leather chair directly to Nathaniel's right, sitting exactly where the $3 million Oxford professor was supposed to sit. Dragomir took his seat across from them, his bodyguards fanning out behind him like shadows. The room was deathly quiet, save for the ambient hum of the New York traffic 50 stories below. "Let's begin," Nathaniel said, never taking his eyes off Dragomir. For the next 2 hours, the obsidian room became a battleground of high-stakes linguistics. Clara was magnificent. She flawlessly volleyed the ancient archaic Wallachian back and forth, translating Nathaniel's cold, calculated corporate jargon into the poetic, prideful language Dragomir demanded. But as the negotiations deepened, Clara's linguistic brain started to catch on to bizarre anomalies. They weren't talking about zoning permits or mineral rights. Not really. "He says the eastern quadrant of the valley must have reinforced UV shielding," Clara translated, furrowing her brow. "And he is demanding guarantees regarding nocturnal logistics and bloodline security for the local inhabitants." Clara paused, looking at Nathaniel. "Mr. Croft, I'm translating exactly what he's saying, but bloodline security, UV shielding. Are you building a sun-proof bunker or a mining facility?" Nathaniel stiffened. Arthur, standing by the door, subtly reached inside his jacket. Humans were not supposed to know. The masquerade was the absolute law of their kind. If a human learned too much, the standard protocol was memory modification or death. Nathaniel looked at Clara. Her brow was furrowed in genuine confusion, her bright, intelligent eyes searching his for an answer. She was brilliant, fearless, and utterly beautiful in the dim lighting of the dining room. The thought of harming her made a strange protective growl rise in the back of his throat. "It's specialized terminology, Clara." Nathaniel lied smoothly, leaning in closer to her so Dragomir wouldn't hear the English. "The UV shielding is for sensitive mining equipment. Bloodline security refers to the hereditary land rights of the indigenous families. Keep going. You're doing perfectly." Clara wasn't entirely convinced, but $500,000 was $500,000. She nodded and turned back to Dragomir. As they reached the final sticking point of the contract, the exact borders of the territory, Dragomir pulled a heavily folded, ancient parchment map from his coat. He slammed it on the table. "El vrea să taie valea la jumătate," Dragomir snarled at Clara, pointing a claw-like fingernail at the map. "Spune-i americanului că dacă cartelul Vivaldi află de această slăbiciune, ne vor măcelări pe toți în somn." Clara turned to Nathaniel. "He says he wants to cut the valley in half. He says if the Vivaldi cartel finds out about this weakness, they will slaughter you all in your sleep." Nathaniel's blood ran cold. "Tell him I am fully aware of the Vivaldi threat. Tell him my security forces have the perimeter locked down. No one knows about the structural weakness in the eastern caves except me and him." Clara translated. Dragomir sneered. "Nereușită minciună." Dragomir barked, pulling out a modern smartphone, a jarring sight against his archaic aesthetic. He tossed it across the table to Nathaniel. "Traducătorul tău a fost foarte vorbăreț înainte să-l găsim noi." "He says your translator was very talkative before they found him." Clara whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. Nathaniel picked up the phone. It was Dominic Harper's phone. The screen was open to an encrypted messaging app. The messages were entirely in English, sent just 3 hours ago to an unknown number. Message 1. I am skipping the meeting. Croft will be blind. Message 2. The eastern caves are structurally compromised. Strike tonight. Vivaldi sends his regards. Nathaniel's eyes flared, a brilliant, unnatural shade of crimson. The temperature in the room plummeted 10 degrees. The glass of water next to Clara's hand literally cracked from the sudden immense pressure in the air. Clara gasped, pushing her chair back. Nathaniel's face had changed. His cheekbones were sharper, his skin paler, and as his lips parted in pure rage, she saw the unmistakable gleam of elongated fangs. Arthur, Nathaniel commanded his voice, echoing with an inhuman resonance. Lock the doors. We've been betrayed. Before Arthur could move, the heavy oak doors of the dining suite exploded inward, shattering into thousands of deadly wooden splinters. The heavy oak doors of the obsidian room didn't just open, they were blown off their hinges. A concussive shockwave of C4 explosives shattered the remaining crystal on the table, sending a cloud of pulverized wood and smoke billowing into the suite. Clara screamed, covering her head, as the blast knocked her backward. Before she could hit the floor, a blur of motion intercepted her. Nathaniel's arm wrapped around her waist, his grip like a vice of cold steel, and he pulled her violently behind the solid, bulletproof mass of the mahogany dining table. "Stay down!" Nathaniel roared over the ringing in her ears, his voice dropping into a terrifying guttural register that shook her to the bone. Through the thick grey smoke, 6 figures poured into the room. They weren't street thugs. They moved with the terrifying, synchronized precision of a Tier 1 military strike team. They were dressed in matte black tactical gear, carrying suppressed Heckler and Coke MP5 submachine guns, their faces obscured by panoramic night vision goggles. But these weren't human mercenaries. As the first attacker opened fire, the muzzle flash illuminated his unnaturally pale skin, and the extended fangs dripping with anticipation. The Vivaldi cartel had sent their elite death squad. The room instantly erupted into a chaotic symphony of violence. Dragomir's massive bodyguards didn't hesitate. Their tailored suits ripped at the seams as they lunged forward, moving with a supernatural velocity that defied physics. Gunfire chewed through the drywall and shredded the priceless Persian rug. These weren't standard bullets. The sharp, acrid smell of burning silver nitrate filled the air. "Arthur, protect Dragomir!" Nathaniel commanded. Arthur, the sharply dressed chief of staff, drew a pair of customized silver-plated Glock 19S from his jacket and laid down a suppressing fire that forced 2 of the assassins into cover, behind a ruined velvet sofa. Clara huddled beneath the table, her hands pressed over her ears, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was an NYU grad student. Her biggest crisis this morning had been a declined Metro card. Now she was caught in the middle of a literal turf war between immortal syndicates in the penthouses of the Waldorf Astoria. She looked up and saw Nathaniel. He had stripped off his ruined Brioni suit jacket. His dress shirt was torn, revealing the corded, impossibly tense muscles beneath. His eyes were no longer the deep, stormy brown that had captivated her minutes ago. They were a blazing, luminescent crimson. He looked feral. He looked magnificent. "I need to get you out of here," Nathaniel growled, crouching beside her, his chest heaving with adrenaline. "There's a reinforced service elevator in the kitchen." "I can't outrun them," Clara yelled back over the deafening crack of gunfire. Suddenly, a harsh, clipped voice echoed from the hallway, shouting tactical commands in rapid-fire Italian. "Fuoco di soppressione a sinistra hanno il vecchio in un angolo. Caricate il fosforo bianco!" Clara's eyes widened. She grabbed Nathaniel's arm, her fingers digging into his shirt. "Nathaniel, the leader in the hall. He's speaking Italian. He's telling them to lay suppressing fire on the left and load white phosphorus grenades." They're trying to burn Dragomir out of the corner. Nathaniel's crimson eyes snapped to hers, a look of profound shock and immense respect flashing across his features. He didn't question her. He didn't hesitate. "Cover your eyes, Clara," he whispered, with an explosive burst of speed that cracked the marble floor tiles beneath his shoes. Nathaniel vaulted over the mahogany table. He didn't run. He became a dark, terrifying projectile. He bypassed the two assassins, engaging Arthur moving so fast the human eye could only register a shadow. He collided with the strike team leader, just as the man pulled the pin on a thermal grenade. The impact sounded like a freight train hitting a brick wall. Nathaniel drove the assassin backward into the corridor, his hand clamping around the man's wrist, forcing the live grenade back into the attacker's own tactical vest. Nathaniel kicked the mercenary into the center of his squad and blurred backward into the room just as the white phosphorus detonated. A blinding, agonizingly bright flash of magnesium fire engulfed the corridor. The screams of the remaining assassins were short-lived, silenced by the consuming supernatural heat of the blast. The fire sprinklers in the ceiling instantly engaged, raining a cold, torrential downpour over the ruined dining suite. Silence slammed back into the room, broken only by the hiss of water hitting the smoldering debris and the heavy, ragged breathing of the survivors. Nathaniel walked back into the room, drenched from the sprinklers, his white shirt clinging to his frame. His fangs slowly retracted, and the crimson fire faded from his eyes, replaced by the warm, dark brown she had seen earlier. He offered Clara his hand, pulling her up from beneath the table. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice entirely focused on her, completely ignoring the devastation around them. I'm okay." Clara breathed, trembling violently, as she took his hand. His skin was cold, but his grip was startlingly gentle. Across the room, Dragomir stepped out from behind a toppled bookshelf. Two of his bodyguards were dead, dissolving into grey ash on the wet carpet. Dragomir's face was twisted in a mask of absolute, unbridled fury. "Tradare!" Dragomir roared, spitting the word like venom. "Asta este o capcană, croft cartelul Vivaldi ne-a găsit. Acordul este mort." Clara didn't even need to wait for Nathaniel's cue. She translated her voice, shaky but clear. "He says it's a trap. He says the Vivaldi cartel found them, and the deal is dead." Nathaniel closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his jaw. If Dragomir walked out, now the sanctuary was lost. The European covens would buy the land, fortify the mountains, and wage an economic and physical war that would drain billions from the American markets and leave thousands dead. "Tell him," Nathaniel said, his voice deadly calm, "that I saved his life. Tell him I will personally eradicate the Vivaldi leadership by dawn. But we need to sign the contract." Clara translated the message, projecting as much authority as she could muster. Dragomir scoffed, brushing ash off his scarred cheek. He switched to heavily accented English, looking directly at Nathaniel. "You fight well, American, like a true warlord. But your strength doesn't fix the map. Vivaldi knows about the eastern caves. They know the structural weakness. If I sign this land to you, they will breach the sanctuary through the caverns. It is a slaughter waiting to happen." Dragomir turned, gesturing for his remaining guards to follow him to the service elevator. The $4.2 billion deal was walking away. Clara looked down at the table. The ancient parchment map Dragomir had slammed down earlier was soaked from the fire sprinklers, but the ink held. She stared at the specific eastern quadrant Dragomir was so terrified of, the region labeled with the alleged structural weakness. She squinted at the faded 15th century calligraphy. Her mind raced back to her dissertation on the topographic linguistics of the Carpathian Basin. "Wait," Clara said aloud. The word echoed in the dripping, silent room. Dragomir stopped. Nathaniel turned to her. "Wait," Clara repeated, stepping toward the table, tracing her finger over the ancient script. Lord Dragomir, you said your scouts translated this region as a hollow cave system, a structural weakness in the bedrock. Duh! Dragomir snapped impatiently. Pestrigol. Yes. Empty caves. They translated it wrong. Clara said, her voice growing stronger, the linguistic puzzle overriding her fear. She looked up at Dragomir, then at Nathaniel. The Vivaldi cartel's informant told them this area is an empty, structurally compromised cavern they can drill through to invade, but the word written here is Apa Morta. Nathaniel frowned. Dead water. Exactly. Clara said, her eyes lighting up with sudden, brilliant realization. In modern translation, it just sounds like a stale underground lake. But in the specific 1400s, regional dialect of this map's cartographer, Apa Moata, referred to a pressurized subglacial aquifer. It's not an empty cave. Clara tapped the map emphatically. It's a massive subterranean reservoir holding millions of gallons of freezing water under immense pressure. If the Vivaldi cartel tries to drill through the eastern rock wall to breach the sanctuary... Nathaniel's eyes widened as the tactical reality hit him. They won't breach a hallway, they'll breach a dam. They will drown themselves, Clara confirmed. The moment they breach the rock, the pressure will instantly flood the tunnels. They won't invade the sanctuary. They will be crushed by a subterranean tidal wave. It's not a weakness, Lord Dragomir. It's the greatest natural trap in the world. The room fell dead silent. The only sound was the dripping of water from the ruined chandelier. Dragomir walked slowly back to the table. He stared at the map. He stared at Clara, his silver eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound reverence. He looked at Nathaniel. Fatata, Dragomir whispered in Wallachian. Ea aminte unui general roman. Shioki unui vultur. What did he say? Nathaniel asked softly, his gaze fixed on Clara. Clara blushed furiously. He said, I have the mind of a Roman general, and the eyes of an eagle. Dragomir reached inside his soaked coat, pulled out a heavy obsidian fountain pen, and leaned over the ruined table. With a sharp, decisive flourish, he signed the Carpathian Initiative. The land is yours, Croft, Dragomir said in English, capping the pen. He gave Clara a deep, respectful bow. Protect her. She is worth more than all your billions. 20 minutes later, the NYPD commissioner, a man securely on the payroll of Croft Capital, had cordoned off the block under the guise of a catastrophic gas main explosion. A specialized cleanup crew was already moving through the Waldorf suite, erasing all evidence of the supernatural conflict. Clara sat on the edge of a dry armchair in the adjoining parlor, an oversized dry cashmere blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She was staring blankly at the wall, the adrenaline finally crashing out of her system, leaving her utterly exhausted. Footsteps approached. Nathaniel crouched in front of her, holding a steaming mug of tea. He had changed into a fresh black tailored shirt, looking impossibly pristine for a man who had just dismantled a death squad. Drink, he said, gently pressing the mug into her cold hands. Chamomile. It helps with the shock. Thank you, Clara whispered, taking a sip. She looked at him. Really looked at him. You're a vampire. I am, Nathaniel replied, unflinching. And you are the most extraordinary human I have encountered in 300 years. He pulled out a sleek black iPad Pro from a leather folio and tapped the screen a few times. He handed it to her. Clara looked at the screen. It was a confirmation page from the Citibank Ultra High Net Worth portal. A wire transfer had just been completed. Amount $500,000. Recipient Clara Jenkins, status cleared. Clara choked on her tea. You actually did it. $500,000. I am a man of my word, Clara, Nathaniel said, a faint, devastatingly charming smile playing on his lips. It should hit your Chase account by morning. Your student loans are gone. Your rent is paid. But we have a new problem. Clara panicked. What problem? You know my secret, Nathaniel said quietly, his tone turning serious. By the laws of my kind, you should be memory wiped. The process is unpleasant, and it often erases years of academic study. Clara's heart dropped. Please. I won't say anything. I swear. I know you won't, Nathaniel said, leaning closer, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Which is why I am proposing a loophole. The laws dictate that outsiders must be wiped, but employees of Croft Capital who sign a supernatural non-disclosure agreement are exempt. Clara blinked. You want to hire me? My previous translator betrayed me and is currently being hunted by Arthur. I am in desperate need of a chief linguistic officer, Nathaniel said smoothly. The starting salary is $2 million a year. Full benefits, dental. And you will never have to serve another plate of caviar as long as you live. Clara stared at the billionaire vampire kneeling in front of her. She thought about her cramped apartment, her ramen noodle diet, and the terrifying, electrifying thrill she felt when he had pulled her behind the table to save her life. $2 million, Clara asked, a slow smile breaking across her face. Does that include hazard pay? Nathaniel laughed, a rich booming sound that warmed the cold room. For you, Miss Jenkins, I will double it. He stood up, offering his hand to her once again. This time there was no gunfire. There was no impending doom. There was only the magnetic pull of a man who ruled the night, looking at her like she was the dawn. Deal, Clara said, placing her hand in his. As his cool fingers closed gently around hers, Clara realized that translating dead languages was a lucrative business. But falling in love with the vampire king of New York, that was going to be the adventure of a lifetime. Did this billionaire vampire romance leave you breathless? If you loved the intense action, the high-stakes drama, and the ultimate plot twist, hit that like button right now. Share this story with your friends who love a good romance, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling original stories every week. Drop a comment below.